The sound of shattering plates echoed through the kitchen at precisely 9:47 p.m., followed by a string of curses from the head chef. In the back corner, past the industrial stoves and the prep stations, Daniel Rivera kept his head down and his hands submerged in scalding dishwater. He had learned long ago that the best way to survive in a place like this was to become part of the machinery. Invisible. Unremarkable. Just another pair of hands scrubbing grease and food remnants off expensive porcelain that most people would never be able to afford. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Daniel had been washing dishes at Bellanova, one of the city's most prestigious Italian restaurants, for nearly 4 years. The establishment sat on the corner of 5th and Maple, its elegant facade promising an experience that justified the $200 per person price tag. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings in the dining room. White tablecloths were changed after every seating. The wine list included bottles that cost more than Daniel made in a month. It was the kind of place where businessmen closed million-dollar deals over veal piccata, where marriage proposals happened over tiramisu, where being seen at the right table meant something in certain circles. But Daniel never saw any of that. His world was confined to a humid room with concrete floors and flickering fluorescent lights. Industrial sinks lined one wall, their metal surfaces worn dull from decades of use. Plastic bins overflowed with dirty dishes that arrived in endless waves throughout the night. The dishwashing station was separate from the main kitchen, connected by a narrow hallway that smelled of bleach and cooking oil. It was hot back there, always hot, even in winter. The steam from the industrial dishwasher made everything damp. Daniel's shirt was usually soaked through by the end of his shift. He was 43 years old, though the hard years had added extra weight to his face, making him look older. His hair, still thick but streaked with premature gray, was always pulled back in a small ponytail. His hands were rough and scarred from years of manual labor, the skin on his fingers perpetually wrinkled from water exposure. He wore the same thing every shift: black pants, a plain white undershirt beneath a kitchen apron, and non-slip shoes that had seen better days. There was a tiredness in his eyes that went deeper than physical exhaustion, the kind that came from carrying disappointments too heavy and too numerous to name. Daniel lived alone in a studio apartment 20 minutes away by bus. The building was old, paint peeling from the walls, but the rent was manageable on his dishwasher's salary. He had a bed, a small kitchenette, a television that only got basic channels, and a bathroom where the shower pressure was weak and the hot water ran out after 10 minutes. It was enough. He had learned to need very little. His routine rarely changed. He woke at noon, ate whatever was cheap and easy, took the bus to Bellanova by 3 in the afternoon, and worked until midnight or later depending on how busy the restaurant was. Then he took the bus home, sometimes stopping at the corner store for cigarettes or instant noodles, and fell into bed too tired to do anything but sleep. 5 days a week, sometimes 6. Year after year. Most of the kitchen staff barely acknowledged him. The chefs were too focused on their stations, too consumed with the pressure of maintaining Bellanova's reputation. The line cooks worked with intense concentration, calling out orders in rapid Spanish and English, a dance of heat and timing that left no room for small talk. The servers swept in and out, their fake smiles reserved for the dining room, their real faces showing only stress and exhaustion in the kitchen. And Daniel, in his corner, was easy to forget about. There was one person who spoke to him regularly. Carmen, a prep cook in her 50s who had worked at Bellanova even longer than Daniel. She was a short woman with kind eyes and hands that moved with the efficiency of someone who had chopped vegetables for 30 years. During the brief lulls between dinner rushes, she would sometimes bring Daniel a plate of food, leftovers that would otherwise be thrown away. "You need to eat something besides bread," she would say, setting the plate down near his station. Daniel would thank her quietly, grateful for the small kindness. Carmen never asked about his life, never pried into why a man his age was washing dishes for minimum wage. She simply treated him like a human being, which was more than most people did. The owner of Bellanova was Vincent Marchetti, a man whose presence filled whatever room he entered. He was in his early 60s, tall and broad-shouldered with silver hair swept back from a face that was handsome in a weathered way. He wore expensive suits that probably cost more than Daniel made in 6 months. His shoes were always polished to a mirror shine. A gold watch glinted on his wrist, and he spoke with the confidence of someone who had built something significant and knew it. Vincent had inherited the restaurant from his father 25 years ago when it was a struggling neighborhood joint with a handful of regular customers. Through sheer will and business acumen, he had transformed it into one of the city's premier dining destinations. He was proud of that transformation, and he let everyone know it. He walked through the kitchen like a general inspecting troops, his eyes catching every detail, every potential mistake. The staff jumped when he appeared, working faster, standing straighter. Daniel had probably been in Vincent's direct line of sight fewer than 10 times in 4 years. The owner had never spoken to him, had likely never registered his existence beyond a vague awareness that someone was back there washing the dishes. And that was fine with Daniel. He preferred to be overlooked. But Vincent noticed everything about his restaurant. He knew when the linguine was overcooked by 30 seconds. He knew when a server had a bad attitude. He knew which suppliers were trying to cheat him and which regulars needed extra attention. He prided himself on this awareness, on being a man who understood every aspect of his business. What he did not know, what he could not have known, was that the man washing his dishes had once been someone entirely different. Daniel Rivera had not always lived in studio apartments and ridden city buses. He had not always scrubbed pans in dim back rooms. There had been another life, so long ago now that it sometimes felt like it had happened to someone else. A life where his name appeared in programs and on posters. A life where people paid money to hear him perform. A life full of music. He had grown up in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of the city. His parents were immigrants who had come north looking for opportunities that never quite materialized. His father worked construction. His mother cleaned houses. They lived in a cramped apartment where 3 children shared one bedroom and money was always tight. But his mother had a guitar, an old acoustic instrument she had brought from home, and sometimes in the evenings she would play songs from her childhood, her voice carrying melodies that made Daniel feel something he could not name. When Daniel was 7, his mother taught him his first chords. His small fingers struggled to press the strings down hard enough, and the sounds he made were clumsy and discordant. But there was something about it that called to him. The way vibrations traveled through the wood. The way different combinations of notes could create feelings. By the time he was 9, he was better on the guitar than his mother. By 12, he was teaching himself songs from the radio, his ears so sharp he could hear a tune once and reproduce it. His parents could not afford formal lessons, but a music teacher at his middle school noticed his talent. Mr. Brennan was a patient man who saw something special in the quiet boy who stayed after class to practice. He gave Daniel extra instruction, loaned him books about music theory, encouraged him to audition for the performing arts high school across town. Daniel got in on scholarship. For 4 years, he immersed himself in music. Classical guitar, jazz, composition. He practiced until his fingers bled, driven by a hunger to be exceptional at something, to transcend the limitations of his circumstances. After high school, he was accepted into the prestigious Eastman School of Music with a full scholarship. It was a dream he had barely dared to dream. Eastman was where serious musicians went, where talent was refined into artistry. He studied under renowned instructors who told him he had a rare gift. His technical skill was impressive, but more than that, he had feeling. When Daniel played, people listened. Really listened. There was an emotional depth to his playing that could not be taught, only cultivated. He specialized in classical and flamenco guitar, 2 demanding styles that required years of dedicated practice. By his junior year, he was performing in recitals that drew notable figures from the music world. By his senior year, he had won competitions, received offers to study in Spain, had been featured in a documentary about young musicians. Everyone said the same thing: Daniel Rivera was going to be someone important in the music world. His future was bright and certain. Then, in the spring of his final year, everything collapsed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His father fell from scaffolding on a construction site. The fall shattered his spine and left him paralyzed from the waist down. The medical bills were catastrophic. The family had minimal insurance. His mother was working herself to exhaustion trying to keep them afloat, but it was not enough. His younger siblings were still in school, still dependent. The family was drowning in debt and desperation. Daniel made a choice. He left Eastman 3 months before graduation. He moved back home. He found work wherever he could get it, taking any job that paid. At first, he told himself it was temporary. Just until his father's situation stabilized. Just until the debts were more manageable. But temporary became permanent in a way he never planned. His father's care was ongoing and expensive. His mother's health began to fail from the stress. His siblings needed support. The years accumulated like sediment, burying his music career under the weight of survival. He sold his expensive guitar, the one that had been a graduation gift from a benefactor, to pay for his father's medication. He stopped playing altogether because it hurt too much to touch an instrument and remember what he had lost. The calluses on his fingers, built up from thousands of hours of practice, gradually softened and disappeared. The muscle memory faded. The dreams receded into a past that felt increasingly unreal. His father died when Daniel was 29. His mother followed 3 years later. By then, Daniel was in his 30s, unmoored and directionless. He had no degree, no career, no prospects. The world of professional music had moved on without him. The contacts he had made were gone. The momentum was lost. He drifted from job to job, never staying anywhere long, never investing in anything that might require hope. Eventually, he ended up at Bellanova, washing dishes because the job required no skills, no interview, no explanation of the gap in his resume. It was simple and straightforward. Show up. Wash dishes. Get paid. Go home. The work was mindless enough that he did not have to think. And for a long time, not thinking was exactly what Daniel needed. He had been at Bellanova for 4 years now, the longest he had stayed anywhere since leaving music school. It was not because he loved the job or felt any loyalty to the restaurant. It was simply inertia. Changing required energy he did not have. This life, as small and joyless as it was, had a certain stability. No surprises. No disappointments. No one expecting anything from him. The other kitchen staff knew nothing about his past. Carmen knew he had grown up in the city but nothing beyond that. The chefs and servers did not know even that much. He was just Daniel, the quiet dishwasher who never caused problems and never called in sick. If they thought about him at all, they probably assumed he had always been this way. A middle-aged man whose life had never amounted to much. Daniel had not touched a guitar in over 14 years. He did not listen to music anymore. The radio in his apartment stayed off. He avoided restaurants and cafes where live music played. It was easier that way. Music reminded him of everything he had given up, every path not taken, every version of himself that had died slowly over the years. So he lived in silence, or as close to silence as the city allowed. Tonight was like any other night at Bellanova. The dinner rush was in full swing. Plates came back in waves, stacked high with remnants of expensive meals. Daniel worked mechanically, scraping, rinsing, loading the industrial dishwasher, unloading, stacking clean plates for the servers to whisk back out to the dining room. The heat was oppressive. His shirt was soaked through. His back ached from standing. But he kept going because that was what you did. You kept going. Around 10 o'clock, Vincent Marchetti came through the kitchen doing his nightly rounds. He stopped at various stations, tasting sauces, examining presentations, offering curt nods of approval or sharp critiques. The staff tensed when he was present, their movements more precise, their focus sharper. Vincent wielded his authority with the casualness of someone who had never questioned his right to it. He paused near the dishwashing station, longer than usual. Daniel felt the owner's presence but kept his eyes on the sink, his hands moving through the soapy water. Vincent was talking to the head chef about something, their voices low and serious. Daniel caught fragments of the conversation. Something about an event next week. Some kind of special dinner. The words washed over him without much meaning. These things rarely involved the dishwasher. Vincent's phone rang. He answered it, his voice shifting to the smooth charm he used with important clients. He walked away, still talking, and Daniel exhaled slowly. The moment had passed. Back to the rhythm of the work. But as the night wore on, something shifted in the atmosphere of the kitchen. Daniel could not pinpoint exactly what, but there was a tension that had not been there before. The servers were whispering to each other between trips to the dining room. The sous chef looked stressed, more than usual. Even Carmen seemed worried about something when she passed by with a tray of prepped vegetables. At 11:30, after most of the dinner crowd had cleared out, Vincent called an impromptu staff meeting in the kitchen. Everyone gathered, cramming into the narrow space between prep stations. Daniel stayed near his station, half hidden behind the industrial dishwasher, but close enough to hear. Vincent stood at the front, his expression serious. "All right, listen up. Next Saturday, we are hosting a very important private event. Alessandro Donati and his wife are celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, and they have chosen Bellanova for the dinner. For those of you who do not know, Donati owns half the commercial real estate in this city. This is not just another reservation. This is an opportunity to impress someone whose recommendation could transform our business." The staff nodded, understanding the stakes. Vincent continued. "The dinner will be intimate. 20 guests. 5 courses. The menu is already planned. But Donati specifically requested live music during the meal. Classical guitar. Something elegant and understated. I had a guitarist lined up, a professional who has played at events like this before. He was perfect for it." Vincent paused, and Daniel could see frustration cross his face. "He called me an hour ago. Family emergency. He cannot do it. He tried to find a replacement, but everyone worth hiring is already booked. It is too short notice. So now I am stuck with an important client expecting live music and no musician to provide it." The kitchen was silent. No one knew what to say. This was Vincent's problem to solve, not theirs. But the owner looked genuinely concerned, which was unusual. Vincent prided himself on having solutions, on never being caught unprepared. "I have been making calls all evening," Vincent said. "Every professional guitarist in the city is either booked or wants an absurd fee for one night's work. The few who are available are not good enough. Donati will know the difference between competent and exceptional. I need exceptional, and I have 1 week to find it." He dismissed the staff with a wave of his hand. "Get back to closing up. I will figure this out." But his voice carried less certainty than usual. The staff dispersed, returning to their end-of-shift duties. Daniel went back to his sink, his mind churning with thoughts he had not allowed himself in years. He knew he should stay quiet. He knew that speaking up would open doors he had sealed shut for good reasons. But something stirred in him, some long-dormant part of his soul that recognized an opportunity, however risky. He tried to push it down, to focus on the dishes, to remind himself that his music career was dead and buried. But the stirring would not stop. Carmen came by as he was finishing the last rack of plates. "You okay?" she asked. "You look like you have seen a ghost." Daniel forced a smile. "Just tired. Long night." She patted his shoulder and moved on to wipe down her station. Daniel stood there, water dripping from his hands, staring at nothing. In his mind, he could hear music he had not played in 14 years. His fingers twitched involuntarily, remembering chord shapes and finger positions. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. This was insane. He could not do this. He was a dishwasher, not a musician. That person he used to be was gone. Dead. There was no bringing him back. But as he untied his apron and prepared to leave for the night, the thought would not leave him alone. Vincent needed a classical guitarist. Daniel had once been one of the best. The gap between those two facts felt like a chasm too wide to cross, but also like a bridge that maybe, just maybe, still existed somewhere in the ruins of his old life. He left Bellanova that night without saying anything to anyone. On the bus ride home, he stared out the window at the dark city streets, his reflection ghostly in the glass. When he got to his apartment, he did not go straight to bed. Instead, he stood in the middle of his small room, looking at the closet he never opened. The one where he had shoved everything from his old life years ago. His hands were shaking as he reached for the closet door. He had not looked inside in over a decade. Had not wanted to face the memories. But now, against all logic and self-preservation, he pulled the door open. Boxes and bags were piled inside, dusty and forgotten. He dug through them until he found what he was looking for. A guitar case, battered and covered in old travel stickers from places he had performed. Daniel carried the case to his bed and laid it down. His heart was pounding. He unlatched the clasps and opened it. Inside was a classical guitar, not the expensive one he had sold, but the first good instrument he had ever owned. A gift from his music teacher in high school. He had kept it all these years, unable to sell it, unable to play it, unable to let it go completely. He lifted the guitar out of the case. The wood was dull from years of neglect. The strings were old and probably out of tune. But it was still intact. Still whole. He sat on the edge of his bed and positioned the guitar in his lap the way he had done thousands of times before. His hands found their places on the neck and body. The weight of it, the shape of it, felt both foreign and familiar. Daniel tried to play a simple chord. His fingers pressed down on the strings, but the positioning was wrong. The sound that came out was muted and ugly. He adjusted and tried again. This time it was better, but still not right. His calluses were gone. His muscle memory was rusty. 14 years was a long time. Maybe too long. He set the guitar aside and put his head in his hands. What was he thinking? That he could just pick up where he left off. That 14 years of not playing could be erased by wanting it badly enough. This was foolish. Delusional. But even as he thought this, another part of him whispered that maybe it was worth trying. Maybe the skills were not gone, just dormant. Maybe they could be awakened. He picked up the guitar again. This time, he played a scale, slowly, carefully. His fingers remembered the pattern even if they were clumsy executing it. He played it again. And again. Each time, it got a little smoother. By the fourth repetition, something clicked. His hands started to remember. Daniel played until his fingers hurt, until his untrained muscles screamed in protest. He played scales and arpeggios and fragments of pieces he had once performed flawlessly. Nothing sounded good. Everything was rough and unpolished. But there were moments, brief flashes, where he heard echoes of who he used to be. And those echoes were enough to make him wonder if resurrection was possible. When he finally put the guitar down, it was 3 a.m. He had to be up in 9 hours for his shift. But for the first time in years, Daniel felt something other than numbness. He felt terrified and hopeful in equal measure. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he was going to do something incredibly stupid. He was going to tell Vincent Marchetti that he could play. Daniel barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw himself standing in front of Vincent Marchetti, trying to explain that the man who scrubbed his dishes could play classical guitar at a professional level. In every imagined scenario, it ended badly. Vincent laughing in his face. The kitchen staff mocking him. Security escorting him out. By morning, his resolve had weakened considerably, but the guitar case sitting in the corner of his room kept drawing his eyes, reminding him that he had already crossed a line by opening it. He spent the morning practicing, or trying to. His fingers were stiff and uncooperative. Simple passages that he once could have played in his sleep now required intense concentration. The strings bit into his soft fingertips, leaving red indentations that would eventually become calluses again if he kept at it. After 2 hours, he could barely press down without wincing. But there was progress, however small. His hands were beginning to remember patterns they had executed thousands of times. The neural pathways were still there, just overgrown from disuse. Daniel arrived at Bellanova early that afternoon, a full hour before his shift started. He had never done this before, and the day manager looked at him with surprise when he walked through the back entrance. The kitchen was in its quiet phase, that brief window between lunch service and dinner prep when only a skeleton crew remained. Vincent's office was on the second floor, accessible by a narrow staircase near the dry storage room. Daniel had walked past that staircase countless times but never had reason to climb it. He stood at the bottom of those stairs for a long time, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was crazy. He should turn around, put on his apron, and forget this whole idea. But his feet carried him upward, one step at a time, until he reached the landing. Vincent's office door was slightly ajar. Daniel could hear the owner's voice inside, speaking on the phone in rapid Italian. He knocked softly, barely making a sound. Then harder. The conversation inside stopped. "Come in," Vincent called out, irritation evident in his tone. Daniel pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was surprisingly modest given Vincent's obvious wealth. A large wooden desk dominated the space, covered with invoices, vendor catalogs, and reservation books. File cabinets lined one wall. A window overlooked the street below. Vincent sat behind his desk, phone still in hand, looking at Daniel with confusion that quickly shifted to annoyance. "Can I help you?" Vincent asked, his tone suggesting that Daniel better have a very good reason for being there. "Mr. Marchetti, I am Daniel. I work in the dish station." My voice came out quieter than he intended. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I heard about your problem. The guitarist who canceled for the Donati event." Vincent set his phone down, giving Daniel his full attention now, though that attention felt more like being examined by a predator deciding if you were worth eating. "Yes? What about it?" "I can play classical guitar. I studied at Eastman School of Music. I could perform for the dinner if you need someone." The words hung in the air between them. Vincent stared at Daniel for what felt like an eternity, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle and built into genuine laughter that made his shoulders shake. Daniel felt his face burning with shame, but he forced himself to stand his ground. "You?" Vincent managed between laughs. "The dishwasher? You studied at Eastman?" "Yes, sir. I was there from 1998 to 2002. I specialized in classical and flamenco guitar. I performed professionally before I came here." Vincent's laughter subsided, but the amusement remained in his eyes. He leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel with the same expression someone might use when encountering an elaborate joke they did not quite understand yet. "Daniel, is it? Let me make sure I am understanding correctly. You are telling me that you, a man who washes dishes in my restaurant for minimum wage, were trained at one of the most prestigious music schools in the country and can perform at a level suitable for entertaining Alessandro Donati and his guests?" "I know how it sounds," Daniel said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "But yes, that is what I am saying." "Then why are you washing dishes?" Vincent's tone had shifted from amused to skeptical. "If you have this incredible training and talent, why are you not performing? Why are you not making real money doing what you apparently studied to do?" Daniel had known this question would come, but he still was not prepared for how much it hurt to answer. "I had family obligations. I had to leave school before graduating. Things happened that made it impossible to pursue music professionally. I needed work that paid immediately, and over time, I just never went back to it." "So you have not played professionally in how long?" 14 years. Vincent laughed again, but this time it was harsher. 14 years. You have not performed in 14 years, and you think you can walk into an event for one of the most important clients I have ever had and play guitar? Daniel, I appreciate the ambition, truly, but this is not a joke. This is my reputation on the line. Donati expects excellence. I cannot afford to have some washed-up dishwasher with delusions fumbling through pieces he maybe knew how to play over a decade ago. Each word landed like a physical blow, but Daniel had expected this. He had prepared himself for rejection, for mockery, for exactly this kind of response. What surprised him was that instead of retreating, instead of apologizing and backing out of the office, he felt anger rising in his chest. Not at Vincent, but at the unfairness of it all. At the years he had lost. At the person he had been forced to become. I understand your concern, Daniel said, and his voice was stronger now. But I am not asking you to take my word for it. Let me audition. Give me one chance to prove I can do this. If I am not good enough, you have lost nothing but 15 minutes of your time. Vincent regarded him silently, his amusement fading into something more calculating. The owner tapped his fingers on his desk, thinking. Finally, he spoke. You are serious about this. Completely serious. And you honestly believe you can perform at the level required? Yes. Vincent stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. He was quiet for so long that Daniel began to think the conversation was over, that he should just leave. But then Vincent turned around, and there was something different in his expression. Not belief, exactly, but curiosity. Maybe a touch of the same recklessness that had pushed Daniel to climb those stairs in the first place. All right, Vincent said slowly. I will make you a deal. Come back here tomorrow night, after the dinner service ends. Bring your guitar. Play for me. If you are actually as good as you claim, if you can convince me that you will not embarrass me in front of Donati, then I will hire you for the event. I will pay you what I would have paid the other guitarist. $500 for 3 hours of playing. Daniel's breath caught. $500 was more than he made in 2 weeks of washing dishes. But, Vincent continued, and his smile turned sharp, if you are not good enough, if you waste my time with mediocre playing, then you are fired. No more dishwashing job. No more anything. You will be out on the street looking for new employment. Those are the terms. Take them or leave them. The office suddenly felt very small. Daniel's mouth went dry. He had expected rejection. He had even been prepared for mockery. But he had not anticipated this. Vincent was willing to give him a chance, but the cost of failure was everything. His job. His income. The small stability he had built over 4 years. All of it would vanish if he could not prove himself worthy tomorrow night. Every logical part of Daniel's brain screamed at him to refuse. To apologize, to go back downstairs, to forget this entire conversation ever happened. He was rusty. His fingers were soft. He had practiced for maybe 3 hours total after 14 years away from the instrument. The odds of him being able to perform at a professional level were absurdly small. This was not a fair bet. This was Vincent calling what he assumed was a bluff, certain that Daniel would back down when faced with real consequences. But there was another part of Daniel, a part he had buried and ignored for so long, that was screaming something different. This was his chance. Maybe his only chance. To prove that he had not wasted his youth studying something that no longer mattered. To prove that the sacrifice had not been for nothing. To reclaim, even for one night, the person he used to be before life had ground him down into someone barely recognizable. I accept, Daniel heard himself say. Tomorrow night. After service. I will be here. Vincent extended his hand across the desk. They shook, and Daniel felt the strength in the older man's grip. It was not a friendly handshake. It was a challenge. A test. Vincent was betting that Daniel would fail, and Daniel was betting everything he had that he would not. Good, Vincent said, releasing his hand. I look forward to hearing what 14 years of washing dishes has done to your classical training. Tomorrow at midnight. Do not be late. And Daniel? Bring your best. You are going to need it. Daniel left the office on legs that felt disconnected from his body. He descended the stairs in a daze, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had an audition. A real audition. And if he failed, he would lose everything. Carmen was in the kitchen when he came down, arranging fresh produce in containers. She looked up and saw his face. "Are you sick? You look pale." "I am fine," Daniel managed. "Just thinking about something." She did not look convinced, but she did not press. Daniel went to his station, put on his apron, and began his shift. But his hands were shaking as he scrubbed the first batch of plates, and his mind was anywhere but on the dishes in front of him. He had less than 24 hours to remember how to be a musician again. Less than 24 hours to transform from a dishwasher into someone capable of performing at a level that would satisfy a man like Vincent Marchetti. The impossibility of it threatened to crush him, but he pushed the fear down and focused on the work in front of him. One dish at a time. 1 hour at a time. And after his shift ended, he would go home and practice until his fingers bled if that was what it took. The rest of that shift passed in a blur. Daniel moved through his tasks mechanically, his body on autopilot while his mind raced through every piece of music he could remember. What should he play for Vincent? Something technically impressive? Something emotionally resonant? Something safe and familiar, or something that would demonstrate range? He ran through his mental catalog of pieces he had once performed, trying to assess which ones he might be able to resurrect in less than a day. When midnight came and the kitchen finally closed, Daniel left immediately instead of lingering to help with the final cleanup like he sometimes did. He needed every possible minute to practice. The bus ride home felt interminable. He stared out the window, his reflection a ghost in the glass, and wondered if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Walking into Vincent's office had felt brave in the moment, but now, in the cold reality of night, it felt reckless. Stupid. He was gambling with his livelihood based on muscle memory that might not even exist anymore. His apartment had never felt smaller than it did when he walked in that night. The guitar case was exactly where he had left it, leaning against the wall. Daniel picked it up, carried it to his bed, and opened it with hands that trembled slightly. The guitar looked back at him, silent and waiting. He lifted it out, positioned it in his lap, and took a deep breath. Then he began to play. For the first hour, everything he touched turned to garbage. His fingers were clumsy and slow. His timing was off. He could not hold the strings down with enough pressure to produce clean notes, and when he tried to play faster passages, his hands simply could not keep up with what his brain remembered. Frustration mounted with each mistake. He stopped and started and stopped again, the apartment filling with discordant sounds that bore no resemblance to music. But gradually, incrementally, something shifted. His fingers began to warm up. The pain dulled to a manageable ache. The patterns started to feel less foreign. He played scales until they became smoother. He worked through arpeggios until the notes flowed together instead of coming out as individual, disconnected sounds. Around 2 a.m, he attempted the first real piece. A simple Bach prelude, one of the first classical pieces he had ever learned. It was rough and imperfect, but it was recognizable. It was music. Daniel played through the night, pausing only when his fingers absolutely refused to cooperate any longer. He would rest for 10 minutes. Shaking out his hands, and then return to the guitar. By dawn, his fingertips were raw and bleeding slightly. His back ached from hunching over the instrument. His shoulders were tight with tension. But he could play. Not at the level he once had, not with the fluidity and emotion he had been capable of in his prime, but well enough that it was not embarrassing. Well enough that someone listening might believe he had real training. He finally allowed himself to sleep around 6 a.m, collapsing on his bed still fully clothed, the guitar carefully returned to its case. He set an alarm for noon, giving himself 6 hours of rest. When the alarm jerked him awake, his body screamed in protest. Every muscle felt strained. His fingers were stiff and swollen. Moving hurt. But he forced himself up, forced himself into the shower, forced himself to eat something even though his stomach was twisted with anxiety. Then he picked up the guitar again and practiced for 6 more hours. By the time he needed to leave for his shift, his hands were a mess. The fingertips of his left hand were covered in painful blisters. His right hand ached from the repetitive motion of plucking strings. But his playing had improved. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The pieces he had chosen were coming together. They were not perfect, but they were decent. Whether decent would be enough for Vincent Marchetti was a question Daniel could not answer. He arrived at Bellanova that evening with the guitar case, which earned him curious looks from the staff. Daniel never brought anything to work except himself and occasionally his lunch. Carmen saw him coming carrying the case and raised her eyebrows. "What is that for?" "I have something to do after my shift," Daniel said, not wanting to explain. "Just keeping it with me so I do not have to go home first." She looked at him strangely but did not push for details. Daniel stowed the guitar case in the small break room where the staff kept their personal belongings, then reported to his station. The evening shift began like any other. Plates arrived in their usual endless stream. Steam filled the air. The familiar rhythm of scraping and rinsing and loading took over. But tonight, Daniel could not lose himself in the work. His mind kept jumping ahead to midnight, to the audition, to everything that hung in the balance. Vincent came through the kitchen twice that evening, making his usual rounds. Both times, his eyes found Daniel and lingered there for a moment longer than necessary. There was something in his expression, a mix of anticipation and amusement, like he was looking forward to watching Daniel fail. It made Daniel's stomach clench, but it also hardened his resolve. He would not give Vincent the satisfaction of backing out. He would show up at midnight with his guitar, and he would play, and whatever happened after that was in the hands of fate. The dinner service that night was particularly busy. Some corporate group had reserved a large table, and they ordered multiple rounds of appetizers, entrees, and desserts. The dishes came back in waves that never seemed to end. By the time the last customers finally left and the kitchen began closing procedures, it was already 11:45. Daniel's shift technically ended at midnight, but he knew Vincent expected him to stay late tonight. The audition would happen after everyone else had gone home. One by one, the staff finished their tasks and left. Carmen was among the last to go, lingering by the door as if sensing something unusual in the air. "You sure you are okay?" she asked Daniel one more time. "I am fine," he lied. "Just tired." "Have a good night, Carmen." She left, and then it was just Daniel, the head chef, finishing his final inventory, and Vincent somewhere upstairs in his office. The chef departed at 12:15, nodding briefly at Daniel on his way out. And then the restaurant was empty except for Daniel and Vincent. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. Daniel retrieved his guitar case from the break room, his hands slick with nervous sweat. He wiped them on his pants and made his way to the staircase leading to Vincent's office. This was it. No more preparing. No more practicing. No more delays. He climbed the stairs, each step feeling like walking toward either salvation or disaster. The office door was open, and Vincent sat behind his desk, looking at his computer screen. He glanced up when Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Ah," Vincent said, checking his watch. "Right on time. I was starting to wonder if you would actually show up. Come in. Close the door behind you." Daniel entered the office and shut the door. The click of the latch sounded final, like sealing himself in a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. He stood there holding his guitar case, feeling exposed and foolish. Vincent gestured to the space in front of his desk. "Set up there. You have the floor. Take whatever time you need to tune your instrument." "I am a patient man when something interests me, and I have to admit, Daniel, you have piqued my curiosity. I have been thinking all day about what a dishwasher who claims to have studied at Eastman might sound like after 14 years away from music. This should be entertaining at the very least." The condescension in his voice was clear, but Daniel did not react. He set the case down, opened it, and lifted out the guitar. The instrument looked shabby in the elegant office, its finish dull and scratched, but it was well built and had good tone. Daniel had forgotten how much he loved the weight and shape of it in his hands. He sat down in the chair Vincent indicated and began tuning, his ears still sharp enough to hear when the strings were properly pitched. Vincent watched this process with interest. "You tune by ear. No electronic tuner. That is old school." "It is how I was taught," Daniel replied, making a final adjustment to the G string. His hands were trembling slightly, but once the guitar was in position, they began to steady. This was familiar territory. This was something his body knew how to do even if his mind was screaming with anxiety. "Whenever you are ready," Vincent said, leaning back in his chair and folding his hands across his stomach. "Show me what 14 years of washing my dishes has left of your talent." Daniel took a deep breath. He had chosen 3 pieces to perform tonight. The first was the Bach prelude he had been practicing, a relatively simple piece that would demonstrate clean technique. The second was a Spanish romance, more emotional and expressive, showing that he could do more than just hit the right notes. The third, if he got that far, was a flamenco piece, fast and technically demanding, the kind of thing that would prove he had real training. He placed his fingers on the strings and began to play. The first notes of the Bach prelude filled the office, clear and precise. Daniel felt his nervousness begin to fade as the music took over. This was what he had trained for. This was what all those years of practice had built. His fingers moved across the fretboard, finding positions without conscious thought. The melody unfolded exactly as it should, each voice distinct, the harmony rich and full. He finished the prelude and moved immediately into the Spanish romance without pause. This piece required more dynamic range, more emotional expression. He played the opening phrases softly, almost whispering, then gradually built intensity. His right hand plucked the strings with varying force, creating swells of volume that gave the music shape and feeling. He closed his eyes, letting himself sink into the sound, and for a moment, he forgot where he was. He forgot about Vincent watching him. He forgot about the bet and the consequences. There was only the music and the instrument and the connection between them. The romance concluded with a gentle descent back to the opening theme, ending on a soft, sustained note that hung in the air for a long moment before fading. Daniel opened his eyes and looked at Vincent. The owner's expression had changed. The amusement was gone. In its place was something Daniel could not quite read. Surprise, maybe. Or confusion. Vincent sat forward in his chair. "Keep going," was all he said. Daniel launched into the flamenco piece, and this was where he pushed himself. His right hand flew across the strings in rapid rasguedo strokes, the technique producing the distinctive percussive sound of flamenco music. His left hand moved up and down the neck, executing runs and ornaments that required precision and speed. This was the hardest thing he had attempted since picking up the guitar again, and he could feel his fingers protesting, the blisters sending sharp pains through his hand every time he pressed down. But he did not stop. He played through the pain, through the uncertainty, through the voice in his head that kept insisting he was going to make a mistake. The flamenco piece built to a dramatic conclusion, a series of rapid chords that culminated in a final flourish. Daniel struck the last chord and let it ring out, then muted the strings with his palm. Silence filled the office. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking again. He had given everything he had, but was it enough? He looked at Vincent, waiting for judgment. Vincent stood up slowly and walked around his desk. He leaned against the front of it, arms crossed, studying Daniel with an intensity that made him want to look away. For a long time, the owner said nothing, and Daniel began to think the worst. That it had not been good enough. That he was about to be told to pack his things and leave. Then Vincent spoke, and his voice was quiet, thoughtful. "That was not what I expected." Daniel did not know how to respond to that, so he stayed silent. "When you came to my office yesterday," Vincent continued, "I thought you were either delusional or running some kind of con. I deal with enough nonsense in this business that I have learned to spot liars and dreamers pretty quickly. I figured you were one or the other. But this," he gestured toward the guitar, "this is real. You can actually play. Not just competently. Actually play." "Thank you," Daniel managed, his voice hoarse. "How is it possible?" Vincent asked, and there was genuine confusion in his tone now, "that someone with your ability is washing dishes in my restaurant? That makes no sense. People with talent like this do not end up scrubbing pans for minimum wage unless something went very wrong in their life." "So what went wrong, Daniel? Why are you here instead of performing somewhere that matters?" The question hit harder than Daniel expected. He set the guitar down carefully, buying himself a moment to compose an answer. "I told you. Family obligations. My father was injured. I had to leave school to help support them. By the time things stabilized, too much time had passed. I had no degree, no connections, no way back into that world. So I did what I had to do to survive." "And you never tried to go back to music? Never tried to pick up where you left off?" "I tried," Daniel admitted quietly. "For a few years after my father died, I tried. I went to open mic nights. I applied for session work. I reached out to old professors. But I had been gone too long. The music world moves fast, and if you are not actively part of it, you get forgotten. People remembered the promising student I used to be, but they did not want to take a chance on the guy who had been away for years with nothing to show for it. Eventually, I stopped trying. It hurt too much to keep hoping for something that was not going to happen." Vincent was quiet, processing this. Then he surprised Daniel by saying, "My father wanted me to be a doctor. He thought running a restaurant was beneath our family, that I should do something respectable. We fought about it for years. He never came to Bellanova, never acknowledged what I built here. He died still disappointed in me. So I understand something about family expectations and the paths we are forced to take." Daniel had not expected that kind of personal revelation from Vincent. It made the owner seem suddenly more human, less like the intimidating businessman who ruled the kitchen with absolute authority. "Here's what is going to happen," Vincent said, his tone shifting back to business. "You are hired for the Donati event. $500, just like I promised. You will play during the dinner, 3 hours of classical guitar. I will give you a list of pieces that are appropriate. You will have 1 week to prepare them. Can you do that?" "Yes," Daniel said immediately, relief flooding through him. "Yes, I can do that." "Good. You will also continue your dishwashing duties this week. I cannot afford to be short-staffed in the kitchen, and I am not going to advertise that my dishwasher is moonlighting as the entertainment. As far as the staff knows, you are still just Daniel who washes the dishes. Is that understood?" "Understood." Vincent reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. He wrote something on the back and handed it to Daniel. "That is my personal cell number. If you have questions about the music or need anything this week, call me. Do not let me down, Daniel. I am taking a risk on you. If you embarrass me in front of Donati, there will be consequences." "I will not let you down," Daniel said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Vincent extended his hand again, and they shook. This time, it felt different. Less like a challenge and more like an agreement between equals. "Now get out of here," Vincent said, but there was no malice in it. "Go home and rest those hands. You have a lot of work ahead of you this week." Daniel packed up his guitar, said goodnight, and left the office. As he descended the stairs and walked through the empty restaurant, he felt like he was floating. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had auditioned and succeeded and earned a chance to perform again. The impossibility of it, the sheer unlikelihood that any of this would work out, made him want to laugh out loud. But he contained himself until he was outside on the street, and then he did laugh, a sound of pure disbelief and joy that echoed in the empty night. The bus ride home felt different than it ever had before. The same streets, the same stops, the same late-night passengers, but Daniel saw it all through new eyes. He had a performance coming up. A real performance. In 1 week, he would stand in front of people and play music and get paid for it. It had been so long since that sentence was true that it felt like fiction. Like something happening to someone else. But it was real. It was happening. And he had 7 days to make sure he was ready. The week that followed became a study in double lives. During the day, Daniel practiced until exhaustion took over, working through the repertoire Vincent had given him. Classical pieces by Albanese, Tárrega, and Villalobos. Elegant compositions that required both technical precision and emotional depth. At night, he reported to Bellanova and washed dishes like nothing had changed, maintaining the careful invisibility he had perfected over 4 years. Carmen noticed something different about him almost immediately. "You seem lighter somehow," she observed one evening while wiping down her station. "Like some weight came off your shoulders." "Just sleeping better," Daniel offered, which was partially true. Despite the physical exhaustion and the pressure building toward Saturday, he was sleeping more soundly than he had in years. Having purpose again, having something to work toward that mattered, had lifted a darkness he had not fully realized was there. The kitchen staff remained oblivious to what was coming. They went about their routines, unaware that the quiet man in the back corner would soon be performing for one of the wealthiest men in the city. Daniel kept it that way, not out of shame but out of self-preservation. If word got out and somehow things went wrong, the humiliation would be multiplied 100-fold. Better to stay silent until after the event, when success or failure would speak for themselves. Vincent checked in twice during the week, appearing at Daniel's station during lulls in service. "How is the preparation going?" he would ask quietly, making sure no one else heard. "Good. The pieces are coming back to me faster than I expected. Saturday arrives in 4 days. Faster is not fast enough. You need to be flawless. I will be ready." Vincent studied him each time with that same calculating expression, as if trying to determine whether Daniel was genuinely confident or simply good at hiding doubt. Daniel was not entirely sure himself. His hands were improving daily, the calluses reforming, the muscle memory solidifying. But there remained a gap between where he was and where he needed to be, and he could only hope that gap would close in time. On Thursday evening, Vincent summoned him to the office after closing. When Daniel arrived, he found the owner with another man, someone Daniel had never seen before. The stranger was perhaps 60, thin and elegant, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He held himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Daniel, this is Robert Chen. He is the music director at the Riverside Theater and an old friend. I asked him to come tonight to hear you play and provide an honest assessment. I hope you do not mind the surprise." Daniel minded very much, but he could hardly object. He retrieved his guitar from where he had started keeping it in the break room and returned to the office. Robert Chen watched him with professional detachment, the gaze of someone who had heard countless musicians and knew within seconds whether they possessed genuine talent or were merely competent. "What will you play for us?" Robert asked, his voice cultured and precise. "I thought the Recuerdos de la Alhambra by Tárrega." A challenging choice. "Please begin." Daniel positioned the guitar and launched into the piece, one of the most famous and technically demanding compositions in the classical guitar repertoire. The tremolo technique it required, rapidly repeating notes to create a sustained, shimmering effect, had taken him years to master originally and days of painful practice to reclaim now. His right hand moved in precise patterns while his left hand navigated the melody, the two working in coordination that looked effortless but required intense concentration. He played the entire piece without stopping, pouring into it everything he had learned and relearned over the past week. When the final notes faded, he looked up to find Robert Chen nodding slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You have legitimate training. That much is obvious. Your technique is sound, though I can hear some roughness that suggests you have not been playing regularly. How long has it been?" 14 years since I performed professionally." Robert's eyebrows rose. 14 years? And you can still play at this level? That is remarkable. Most musicians who step away for even a few years struggle to return to form. The fact that you have managed this in a week speaks to how deeply ingrained your training was. He turned to Vincent. You have found yourself a real musician here, not some amateur. I do not know the full story of how this came about, but if this is the quality of playing your guests will hear on Saturday, they will be impressed. My only advice would be to choose pieces that play to his strengths. The tremolo work is excellent, but some of the faster passages show slight hesitation. Stick with lyrical, expressive pieces where emotion matters more than speed. Vincent looked pleased with this assessment. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate you taking the time. After the music director left, Vincent poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle on his desk and handed one to Daniel. To Saturday, he said, raising his glass. May it exceed all expectations. They drank, and Daniel felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. Robert Chen's approval meant something. It meant he was not fooling himself about his abilities. It meant Saturday might actually work. The day of the Donati event arrived with clear skies and unseasonable warmth. Daniel woke early despite having worked until 2 in the morning, his mind too active to allow more sleep. He spent the morning in final practice, playing through his repertoire one last time, making sure every piece was polished and ready. His hands felt strong now, the blisters healed into proper calluses, the fingers responding with the agility he remembered from his youth. At 3 in the afternoon, he showered and dressed in the only formal clothing he owned, a simple black suit he had bought years ago for his mother's funeral. It was slightly out of style but clean and presentable. He packed his guitar carefully and took the bus to Bellanova, arriving 2 hours before the dinner was scheduled to begin. The restaurant had been transformed for the evening. The main dining room, which usually seated 80 guests, had been reconfigured for a single long table down the center. White linens, silver place settings, crystal glassware, and elaborate floral arrangements created an atmosphere of refined elegance. Candles waited to be lit. A small platform had been constructed in the corner where Daniel would sit while playing, elevated just enough to be visible but not so prominent as to dominate the space. Vincent met him in the kitchen, looking impeccable in an expensive suit. Tonight is important for many reasons, but I want you to remember something. These people, the Donatis and their guests, they have heard professional musicians before. They have been to concerts at Carnegie Hall, operas in Milan, private performances by world-renowned artists. You are not competing with their memories of those experiences. You are providing atmosphere for their celebration. Play beautifully, play confidently, and let the music support the evening rather than trying to steal attention from it. Understand? I understand. Good. The guests arrive at 7. You will begin playing at 7:15, once everyone has been seated and the first course is being served. Take your position at 7 and tune your instrument. I will signal you when to start. Daniel nodded and made his way to the platform. He set up his chair, arranged his music stand, and checked the small lamp that would illuminate his sheet music. Everything was in place. He tuned the guitar, checked it again, and then sat back to wait. The kitchen buzzed with controlled chaos as the staff prepared for service. Servers hurried past in their formal attire. Chefs called out to each other in the urgent shorthand of professional cooking. And Daniel sat in the corner of the dining room, breathing slowly, centering himself. At precisely 7 o'clock, the first guests arrived. Daniel watched from his platform as they entered, men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns, all carrying themselves with the casual confidence of wealth. Alessandro Donati was easy to identify, a distinguished man in his 70s with thick white hair and the commanding presence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His wife, Maria, walked beside him, elegant and poised, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The guests took their seats, servers poured wine, and the ambient noise of conversation filled the space. Vincent moved among the tables ensuring everything was perfect, then caught Daniel's eye and gave a small nod. It was time. Daniel placed his fingers on the strings and began to play. He started with a gentle piece by Tarrega, something soft and warm that would settle into the background of conversation without demanding attention. The notes flowed easily, his hands executing the familiar patterns with confidence born from endless repetition. He kept his eyes mostly on his music, but occasionally glanced up to gauge the room's response. No one was watching him directly, which was exactly right. The music was there, a pleasant accompaniment to the evening, noticed but not intrusive. He moved seamlessly from one piece to the next, maintaining a steady flow of melody that filled the spaces between conversation. An Albanese prelude. A Bach courant. A Spanish romance. Each piece carefully chosen to match the progression of the meal, starting quietly and building gradually as the dinner advanced. By the third course, Daniel had found his rhythm. The nervousness that had gripped him earlier had dissolved into the music. This was what he had trained for all those years ago. Not just the technical ability to play the notes, but the musical intelligence to read a room and adjust accordingly. When conversation grew animated, he pulled back the volume slightly. When there were natural lulls, he allowed the music to come forward. It was a dance between performer and audience, subtle and intuitive. He noticed Vincent watching him from near the kitchen entrance, and the owner's expression showed satisfaction. Whatever Vincent had hoped for tonight, it was happening. The evening was proceeding flawlessly. Daniel allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. He was doing this. He was actually doing this. After 14 years away, he was performing again, and it felt as natural as breathing. During the fourth course, as he transitioned into a particularly beautiful piece by Villalobos, Daniel noticed that the conversation at the table had quieted somewhat. People were still talking, but more softly, as if unconsciously drawn into the music. Maria Donati turned slightly in her chair, her attention drifting toward the corner where Daniel played. She watched him for a long moment, her expression thoughtful, then leaned over and said something to her husband. Alessandro Donati looked in Daniel's direction, listened for a moment, and nodded. He said something back to his wife, and she smiled. Daniel could not hear their words, but he saw approval in their faces. That was enough. He continued playing, letting the music speak for itself, and finished the Villalobos piece with a delicate closing phrase that faded into silence. The guests applauded, a spontaneous gesture that caught Daniel off guard. It was not loud or prolonged, just a moment of appreciation, but it pierced something in his chest. How long had it been since anyone had applauded his playing? How long since his music had moved people to respond? Vincent appeared at the platform during the brief pause before dessert service. That was beautiful, he said quietly. Truly beautiful. Whatever I am paying you is not enough. Daniel smiled, overwhelmed by the compliment. Thank you for giving me this chance. Thank yourself. You earned it. The final course arrived, and Daniel played his closing selections, pieces that brought the musical journey full circle back to the gentle, contemplative mood of the beginning. As the last guests finished their desserts and began to depart, Daniel played his final piece, a Spanish lullaby his mother used to sing, transformed now into a guitar arrangement that carried both melancholy and peace. When the last note faded and he set down the guitar, the room erupted in applause again, this time louder and more sustained. The remaining guests turned to face him, clapping genuinely. Alessandro Donati stood and walked over to the platform, Vincent following close behind. Young man, you have a remarkable gift. That was the finest dinner music I have heard in many years. Where did Vincent find you? Daniel glanced at Vincent, uncertain how to answer. The owner stepped in smoothly. Daniel is a very talented musician who studied at Eastman. We are fortunate he was available tonight. Eastman? Donati looked impressed. I sit on the board there. What year did you graduate? I did not graduate, Daniel admitted. I left in my final year due to family circumstances. That is unfortunate. But clearly the training stuck. You should be performing professionally if you are not already. Thank you, sir. That means a great deal coming from you. Donati pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. I host several events throughout the year that require quality entertainment. If you are interested in future work, contact my assistant. The pay is. generous for the right talent, and I believe you qualify. Daniel took the card with hands that trembled slightly. He had come tonight hoping simply not to fail, not to embarrass himself or Vincent. The possibility of future work, of connections that might lead somewhere, had not even entered his calculations. Yet here it was, offered freely by one of the most influential men in the city. After the guests departed and the staff began cleanup, Vincent found Daniel packing up his guitar. The owner handed him an envelope. Your payment, plus a bonus. You exceeded every expectation I had. Daniel opened the envelope and found not $500 but $1,000. Vincent, this is too much. It is exactly right. You saved this evening and made Bellanova look exceptional in front of people who matter. That is worth far more than $1,000 to me. He paused, then added, I have been thinking about something. How would you feel about performing here regularly? Say, Friday and Saturday nights? We could advertise live classical guitar, draw a different clientele. I would pay you separately from your dishwashing wage, and we could make it official. Build it into part of what Bellanova offers. Daniel stared at him, unable to process what he was hearing. You want me to perform here regularly? Why not? You are good. Better than good. And you are already here anyway. It seems foolish not to take advantage of the talent literally washing dishes in my kitchen. I do not know what to say. Say yes. Say you will think about it. Say anything except no, because that would be wasteful. Yes, Daniel heard himself say. Yes, I would like that very much. They shook hands, and this time it felt like the beginning of something rather than the sealing of a bet. Daniel left Bellanova that night with his guitar case in one hand and an envelope full of money in the other, walking on air. The bus ride home passed in a blur. When he reached his apartment, he set down the guitar case and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number he had not called in months. His daughter answered on the third ring, her voice sleepy. Dad? It is almost 2 a.m. Is everything okay? Everything is fine. Better than fine. I just wanted to tell you something. Do you remember how I said I used to play guitar when I was younger? Vaguely. You never really talked about it. Well, I played tonight. A real performance. At a fancy restaurant for important people. And they loved it, sweetie. They actually loved it. There was a pause, then his daughter's voice came back warmer and more awake. Dad, that is amazing. I did not know you still played. I did not. Not for a long time. But I am playing again now. And I think things might be changing for me. Good changes. They talked for another 20 minutes, Daniel telling her the abbreviated version of the past week, leaving out the parts about the bet and the risk of losing his job. When they finally said goodnight, he sat on his bed holding the phone, feeling more connected to his daughter than he had in years. He opened the guitar case one more time, looking at the instrument that had carried him through tonight. Tomorrow he would return to the dish station, would scrub pots and plates and maintain his quiet invisibility in the kitchen. But now there would be Friday and Saturday nights when he would step into a different role, when his hands would create beauty instead of simply removing grime. Carmen was the first to learn the truth. She arrived for her shift on Sunday to find the kitchen staff buzzing with gossip about the mysterious guitarist who had played at the Donati dinner. When she learned it had been Daniel, her eyes went wide with shock, then immediately filled with tears. Why did you never tell anyone? She demanded, hugging him fiercely. All this time, you had this gift and you were hiding it? It was complicated, Daniel said. But I am not hiding anymore. Word spread through Bellanova over the following days. The servers, the line cooks, even the delivery drivers eventually heard about the dishwasher who was actually a classically trained musician. Some reacted with surprise, others with skepticism, but most with a kind of respect Daniel had never experienced in the kitchen before. He was no longer invisible. He was no longer just the guy who washed dishes. He had become Daniel the guitarist who also happened to wash dishes, and that small shift in perception changed everything. On Friday night, Daniel performed publicly at Bellanova for the first time as a regular fixture. Vincent had advertised it minimally, just a small note on the website and reservation system about live classical guitar on weekend evenings. But word had apparently spread, because the restaurant was completely booked, and several guests specifically mentioned the music when making their reservations. Daniel played that night in his black suit, positioned on the small platform that was now a permanent addition to the dining room. The performance felt different than the Donati dinner. Less pressure, more joy. He played for 3 hours, taking short breaks between sets, and when the evening ended, several guests approached to compliment his playing and ask where else they could hear him perform. Vincent watched all of this with satisfaction. "I think we have stumbled onto something special here," he told Daniel that night. "This is good for business, good for the restaurant's reputation, and I suspect good for you as well." "It is very good for me," Daniel agreed. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring. Daniel continued washing dishes during weekday shifts and performing on weekends. The extra income allowed him to move to a better apartment, to buy a new guitar, to rebuild savings he had depleted long ago. But more than the money, it was the music itself that transformed him. Each performance reminded him of who he used to be and showed him who he was becoming. Not the promising student from his youth, but someone different. Someone who had been broken and had found a way to piece himself back together. He started teaching on Tuesday afternoons, giving lessons to students at a local music school. The director there had heard him play at Bellanova and offered him the position. It was only a few hours a week, but it connected him back to the world of music education he had left behind. The business card Alessandro Donati had given him led to 3 more private events over the spring and summer, each one paying well and expanding his network further. He was not famous. He was not wealthy. But he was making a living with music again, supplementing it with dishwashing when needed, and that felt like a kind of miracle. One Saturday evening in late summer, as Daniel finished his first set and took a break in the kitchen, Carmen approached him with an expression he could not read. "There is someone here asking for you." "A young woman. She says she is family." Daniel walked out to the dining room and found his daughter waiting near the entrance. She had driven 5 hours from college to surprise him. He had told her about the weekend performances but had not expected her to actually come. "I wanted to hear you play," she said, hugging him. "To see this whole new life you have built." Daniel secured her a table near the platform, and for the next 2 hours, he played for his daughter, for the other guests, for Vincent and Carmen and everyone who had been part of this unlikely journey. He played pieces he had known for decades and pieces he had learned only recently. He played with technical precision and emotional honesty. And when the evening ended and the last guests departed, his daughter came to the platform with tears in her eyes. "I am so proud of you, Dad. I always knew you worked hard, but I never understood what you had given up. What you sacrificed. And now to see you reclaim this, it is beautiful." They left Bellanova together that night, father and daughter walking through the warm summer air, talking about music and life and all the unexpected ways both could surprise you. Daniel carried his guitar case, the same battered case that had sat untouched in his closet for so long, now a constant companion again. He thought about the moment he had opened Vincent's office door, terrified and desperate, betting everything on a skill he was not sure still existed. That bet had paid off in ways he never could have imagined. Not because he had become famous or wealthy, but because he had found a way back to himself. The music had been there all along, waiting patiently through all the years of silence, ready to return the moment he was brave enough to reach for it again. And that, he realized, was the real miracle. Not that he had gotten a second chance, but that he had found the courage to take it. Up next, you have got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you will not want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.